launchpad.io, Steam, our own launchpad, just with one purchase. So it was technically like an ERC 1155, which was one of the first 1155s. This is back in like 2017. It was actually soulbound too, parts of it anyway. But yeah, it was a really fun experience. It was on Ethereum mainnet, but ran into like some issues. Even though we had, I don't know, 6 of the top 25 games on Steam, scaling of Ethereum was kind of the issue. So it was hard to see that being a profitable business because NFTs and things weren't back then what they are today. So I was trying to sell, $20 box sales with the gas fees on Ethereum. Just wasn't really a sustainable business. Yeah, and then I got back in. So I actually left and did a hearing aid startup that's going quite well. Nothing to do with blockchain, but got back into it about 2.5 years ago when I really saw these technologies, the other L1s and L2s that were, helping to reach scale that you could actually see consumer-based apps, and did like a really thorough, view of the industry, and that's why I found Solana.
Mhm. So for someone who is like new, relatively new to Solana, right? So it's a public blockchain,
Mm-hmm.
right? So how would you compare to other public blockchains in the space, the most popular one?
Yeah, the main thing, Solana has built a completely new architecture for uh, blockchains, and it was basically built by Qualcomm and network engineers. So Qualcomm, very, very chip and optimization focused. And so you look at basically every single step of the stack. What's the bottleneck, and how can you kind of fix it in a way that facilitates, decentralized collaboration. And proof of history is one of the ones that's really branded really well, but there's been at release, there's about 8 or 9 core innovations, and then there's been 14 major releases since then with new improvements. So it's basically just very, very optimized. I think people kind of assume that the trilemma has been hit by other blockchains, but when there is
Mhm.
just fundamental engineering improvements and optimizations for blockchain specific applications that you can make, and that's kind of what Solana has done. So Solana processes more transactions per day than all other public blockchains combined. So yeah, it's just fundamentally different technology, I guess, is the long and short of it. That's
So
parallel computation and really efficient.
So in other words, you can say that as opposed to proof of stake, like so you have the proof of history basically is faster because you do not need like to communicate to validate a block, right? You have I remember like from the last memo I read, like the block time was about around 400 milliseconds, right? So
Yeah.
roughly, is that true?
So it still uses a proof of stake algorithm. The main thing with proof of history is it makes it so the schedule of where everybody knows to send and communicate block information is more known. It's a way of basically saying, oh, I know exactly who to communicate to and when the next block starts. It's a way of keeping time on chain, so you know when so validators know when it's their turn, and everybody knows whose turn it is. So it's just like a really efficient way of that communication. Because most, if we're going to get technical, most uh, leader schedules you have to like find the leader, and then the propagation of the block is in n squared time. So it's a very inefficient gossip protocol that people have to communicate, whose turn it is and the information about what happened. But with Solana, it's some parts of it's linear time and some of it's uh, log n time. Anyway, so it's much more efficient the way that Solana does it.
Got it. So obviously you've been through a lot, right? And especially last year was crazy year for today. I'm not even gonna like mention all the everything that happens on a centralized side of things, but also
Yeah.
there is a situation where I remember like so around May, right? Where there was bugs on how the blockchain process offline transactions. So that was also a challenging time for you
Hmm.
guys, right? And there was outage, which I know that you came across and then you fixed it, right? So maybe if you
Hmm.
can talk a little bit about this side of things, like for someone who is like, who've been criticizing the Solana Foundation for this particular bug, and
Sure.
then like you fix it now running faster, maybe just to eliminate those concerns.
Yeah. So security is like paramount in blockchain. So if the blocks are propagating and everybody has to kind of agree on something, Solana has a very, very defined uh, constraints on what the next block has to be and how people have to, the different entities have to agree on it. And the case you're talking about is they didn't quite agree on the next, it didn't fulfill some of those constraints. So it's kind of like the security versus liveliness trade-off. When blocks get confirmed on Solana, so the proof of history we were talking about earlier, every single batch of transactions is sequentially signed. So you have a very, very defined proof. Like if whoever has the longest block can fundamentally prove it on Solana. So in that sense, it's very secure on any confirmed transactions. So there's some parts of Solana that is very stable. So Solana has never had a rollback in the history of the chain of an optimistically confirmed block. So any single confirmation has never been rolled back. This case where the chain would halt is if they couldn't confirm, and they would kind of reach a state where. Yeah.
There was a consensus bugs, essentially, what happened, right?
Yeah. So I just want to make that clear. There was no like on-off switch. This was is quite literally a decentralization and people not all these disparate entities not being able to agree on the next step, as opposed to no individual entity or anybody shut it off. And then again, to when the chain restarted, it was 80% of the stake weight agreeing on the restart state. So it's like proliferating again all these signatures, and then saying, yeah, this is what blocks we're going to propagate on top of. So
maybe more precise question. Sorry if I'm just expedite it. So why did it take like hours to basically reach this consensus?
Oh, because you have to have 2,000 people. There's 2,000 validators, and 2,000 validators have to agree on both what went wrong and is it okay? Is it safe to restart? Because again, 80% of stake weight has to agree to restart, so they have to vote on and come to a conclusion that this is the right state and this is the right solution. It's like that's why it's kind of interesting when people conflate this with some sort of centralization where like Solana turns off and turns off again. Like that's all we needed to do, then it would have taken 5 minutes. But I want to be clear though, like Solana was down for 18 hours or 19 hours in 2022. There's a lot of other public blockchains, proof of stake blockchains that also did that one, or even more. So in a proof of stake blockchain, if you can't reach 66% of stake weight votes in favor of blocks, the chain will halt. So like Polygon, Optimism, Arbitrum all faced just as longer outages. So Solana is a very popular blockchain, so when it halts, it's very visible. But it is just a thing that's going to happen with proof of stake blockchains, that there will be outages every once in a while.
So it's interesting that we can segue a little bit about the CeFi component, right? So because CeFi and DeFi right now, they are intertwined in a paradoxical way, and some of the people who are coming on board now, it's hard for them to differentiate what is a true decentralized project, right? They conflate a lot of like infrastructures, and they think, oh, one is like also decentralized net. And then they're shocked what happened, like why did the CeFi institutions fail and collapse? So how would you describe, in terms of DeFi adoption, what is the major important thing that we have to make sure people understand? What's the major difference between the CeFi and DeFi worlds?
I think the major thing that is the actual control over your funds at any given time. No entity can prevent you from moving out of whatever that DeFi protocol is, or moving in, and you may be able to put it into a state where it's locked or something, but you have the rights over or at least when it gets locked, you have complete transparency in code, in visible code, or the visibility to get. So it's basically happening on chain, all of those actions. That currently has some frictions. One of honestly, it's just like a functional thing where most of the on-ramps are actually going through centralized exchanges themselves. So you kind of have to, I think that kind of curtails adoption when the average consumer sits right next to an exchange that's centralized before they can get to the decentralized exchange. like that making that hop. Whereas if you just went on ramped directly to the decentralized exchange, maybe that would be like a better user experience. So there's a lot of explorations going on there. Obviously, all the DeFi protocols are incentivized to facilitate that. Then it's just like getting all the on ramps, off ramps, and regulatory things involved to get directly into crypto and not having to go through a custodial solution first.
So if you were to kind of, I mean, again, I understand it's a broad question, but if you were to mitigate the certain risks processed by CeFi institutions, because again, Solana is a public blockchain, you allow any dApps to build on top of you, right? So which creates a certain risk if they fail as a centralized entity, like it goes back to you in a way, at least from the reputational standpoint of view, right? So how would you that there are ways for DeFi protocols can mitigate those risks?
So I think this is actually one of the reasons. This is a great question because there's a lot of aspects to blockchain that kind of have to be improved in parallel. I just talked about on-ramp, off-ramps, and like there's some frictions there. So that's one of it. There's also like the consumer protections and key management, like how are the wallets doing it? So each wallet kind of has to do that, but then the protocols themselves, what are they facilitating? There's also just, even like browsers and all these other entities that have to kind of work together and sort of so the consumer really knows, what they're getting on into, or they don't have to know what they're getting into, but they can still utilize these things in very intuitive ways that have all the benefits of DeFi while still maintaining sufficient decentralization where they still actually control all of their things. So for me, like I think the answer to your question is like a lot of different systems have to mature in order for these things to be competitive and for the average consumer. But now you basically have a bunch of enthusiasts who see the future that this is actually just better. It's less frictions and more liquidity in a lot of ways, but it's not as clear to the average consumer. And so, yeah.
Well, I mean, from the good news, right? And also like by the end of the year, last year in November, if I'm correct, like Google announced that they would run Solana validators, which is exciting news. And I think that's a sign of maturity, I would say, right? So how long do you think it will take for us to mature, like, and when it's going to stabilize?
I think we're mature in some ways now. I think there's so many different dimensions basically that I think it will take across like a consumer protection line, the way that the infrastructure interacts with it. And then it's just, people finding those killer apps that actually make use of all these things to find product market fit in whatever vertical. I think it will happen very quickly once those certain triggers kind of get hit. Like once you kind of have sufficient level of consumer protections, certain things become intuitive enough, then a lot of the other things will just kind of like slow at first, but then all at once is kind of the moniker. And I really think that's going to happen, and I think it's probably going to happen more than sooner than a lot of people think. Because once you get that, like a lot of frictions get taken out. There's this saying a solution in search of a problem, and people associate that with blockchain, but I think that's like a pretty naive way of looking at it. I think you and I and anybody and most people listening to this podcast could probably just rattle off like 50 things that blockchain problems that it solves. So that's not the issue. The issue is wrapping it up into a complete product that has product market fit.
Yeah, that's one of the most challenging part. People who actually build and implement it, and they realize how complicated it is, and that's why I'm glad that we're doing this discovery to make sure people understand the complexity. Listen, I can ask you questions like, I don't know, 50 questions, but I want to open up the floor to our community, right? So they've already sent a bunch of questions to YouTube, Twitter. Okay. So I'm just going to read them all, and then feel free to answer in whatever shape or form you prefer. Okay, so first question from Twitter we have from Glitch Trap. How was 2022 for Solana's development? Is the number of active developers increasing in the Solana Foundation?
Yes. So there was this weird report that said that Solana one, it's like hilarious. It said that Solana had something like 2,000 developers at one point, and then reduced to 75. But that report was just talking about the core repo, basically the mono repo of each of the protocols. So Solana has about 75. Solana Labs has about 75. But then there's also FireDancer, which is the second validator client. So Solana is going to be besides Ethereum, it's going to be the only public blockchain with a second validator client. Which is great. So that's like one of the major awesome things that happened that we facilitated in the protocol. It actually is already propagating some blocks. FireDancer, the second client, is already propagating some blocks in kind of a test environment. So that's been amazing. So all the internal development has been really great. Like again, 14 major releases in the last 2.5 years. And then the ecosystem development is growing widely. You can check out solana.com/news. We've actually produce a report on the number of ecosystem developers. Solana is second only to Ethereum mainnet, and doing just very vibrant ecosystem. I'm actually at a community co-working space with over 150 Solana devs. And this is just Salt Lake City, Utah, just like some random place. There's no special, like in Turkey right now, there's a hacker house with 1,000 community members and devs. And so it's just a very vibrant community. So 2022 was a lot of things, but in terms of development on Solana, it was great.
Okay, so there's some few curveballs, so I'm gonna throw them your way. So Abubakar Omar from YouTube is asking, how's the NFT space in Solana going right now after the price and interest soared? Maybe youth and the gods should reconsider their decision of migrating to Polygon.
Well, because this is migrating to Ethereum mainnet, the Utes are going to Polygon as far as I understand it. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, from my point of view, anybody's just trying to operate a business. Like so Solana Foundation, we're trying to just be facilitators of a vibrant ecosystem. And however people want to operate their business, permissionless protocol. People moving on and off, like obviously we'd want to be able to facilitate something that was a sustainable business. So if something moves off, so like we're not happy about that. But what we're concentrating on is just setting up the ecosystem for success. So a lot of innovation is happening. I mean, you see a lot of interesting explorations across all ecosystems around what NFTs mean, because Blur is coming out and like taking away royalties and adding them back in, and there's kind of this fight between them and OpenSea. And on the Solana side, there's a lot of like really great advancements that are very much like beyond those kinds of things. Those are more anyway. So Solana's programmatic implementations can have a lot more certifications of royalties and certain types of monetization than other ecosystems. So that's pretty exciting advancements. And a lot is continuing to evolve there. And that's what I get excited about, just like setting up a lot of NFTs and creators and to operate successfully and have transparent of what their actual incentive is when they operate their business.
Mm-hmm. So there's another question, again, not directly related to Solana, but you can skip if you want. Ahmed from YouTube is asking, are liquidity problems the real reason behind Everland shutting down? How can we provide better liquidity and funding to promising projects and developers?
I mean, I actually don't know that much about that specific one. There's definitely, I mean, we're at a bear, and there was a lot of mania. So there's definitely is like getting liquidity back into the system and all systems is definitely a high priority. I mean, Bonk and like other things showed you that even like meme coins can add a bunch of liquidity back into systems. And so a lot of my focus is around getting these consumer apps where people just enjoy just spending capital. I think right now, one of the issues is a lot of people, a lot of liquidities in systems because of speculative purposes, where their money always goes up kind of idea, where we just need more and more apps where people are just happy to spend money with no presumption that it's going to increase in value. They want to consume something. And so that's kind of a lot of my focus, and a lot of our focus now is, finding product market fit across different industries.
Okay, so it's there are more questions of this sort, so I'll just skip them. We'll
Mhm.
go straight forward to the Solana Foundation side. So Nakamoto-san is from YouTube is asking, is Solana an easy blockchain to build on? Are there developer communities where I can go and find help to get started with it?
Yes, well, interestingly enough, Solana is one of the main blockchains that has a stack exchange. So you can actually go there and just ask
Mhm.
questions and um, things, even after they shut down most of them. So to answer the question, it's easy to do standardized things. So if you want to mint NFTs or do tokens or DAOs and stuff, there's actually the way that Solana works is uh, code is separated from state. So code is reusable for a lot of these core primitives. And the way that you interact with them is very similar to Web2, where you just submit your configuration. So if you want to make a token, I don't have to copy and paste the whole contract. I just say, I want, this token supply, and this is my image and whatever. Um, so in that sense, it's really easy to program on. The If we want to do something extremely custom, it is different. It is a lower level programming environment than the EVM, but we are drastically improved that over the last couple of years. And you actually program in Python now for on-chain code. It's called Seahorse. And then EVM is coming with Neon probably in the next quarter, and then Move will come maybe a quarter or two after that. So very, very flexible and very, we're trying to basically just be this really flexible environment for developers and have a great developer experience. And that again, just it's all about just setting companies up for sustainable business models.
We have a short question from Mehmet from LinkedIn, who is following the roadmap. Will Solana eventually work on 10,000 transactions per second? What is the maximum reach for the chain scalability?
So transactions is a kind of a loaded term. Today, Solana, if you just had transfer transactions, could do 10,000 easily. And
Mhm.
Solana blocks aren't full today. So it's just there's also a representation of demand. So yeah, Solana can do 10,000 today. That's a little bit different than the number of transactions it is doing, because a lot of the transactions are actually these very complex arbitrage bots that will do many, many, many hops. So the compute units are very high. But even with all those, the blocks aren't nearly full today. Um, that being
Mhm.
said, so it's partly, and then it's partly this supply and demand thing. But advancements like Firedancer is already looking to do over 1 million transactions per second of the simple transfer type. How many that will equate to in more complex transactions, in hundreds of thousands. Yeah, but like I think one of the things to point out here, though, is that Solana's improvements in the capacity is based on partly on hardware. So if there's more demand, you can just put more hardware, but also all these 14 releases since launch. There's just iterative improvements. There doesn't require like a Solana 2.0 to get to these levels. It's just optimizing each layers of the stack, because every layer of the stack has this fundamental improvement on it. It's just very much engineered for this blockchain specific use case. So it's pretty exciting times, and that's why the question about 2022 earlier was so great. Is like, yeah, like the protocol is just from last year, at this time to now, has just been like a fundamentally improved protocol. So it's uh, yeah, it's great to see.
So there's actually a good logical transition into this question. So Moxie from YouTube is
Mm.
asking, what's the urgent agenda at Solana Foundation right now? What are the immediate issues to be dealt with?
Immediate issues to be dealt with. I mean, I think honestly, there's like non-technical stuff just around perception and making sure we control our narrative. I mean, we're just a bunch of just engineers, honestly. Like we didn't even have any marketing people until maybe a couple months ago, and so we kind of realized that, oh, there's other people are controlling our narrative, and people just have these weird perceptions on how different entities are interacting with Solana. So part of it is just reset a little bit and say, hey, there is Solana is like certifiably one of the most decentralized protocols in existence. Over 22 100 nodes actively operating the network, validating blocks, very, very distributed stake weight. And so this is very decentralized network, but it's kind of interesting to lose a narrative that these other networks with maybe only 100 permissioned validators and or single sequencers are considered more decentralized somehow. And so we're trying to figure out how to, do that. I think that's like one of the biggest things top of mind is like let people know that, applications are set up for success and there's really great user experiences on Solana because of how, like you mentioned, the 400 millisecond block time. And as I was saying, there's never been a rollback. So you have these very much like Web2 speeds, and you've seen a lot of really good consumer applications because of that. So just like helping people understand that is kind of the biggest top of mind thing, because out of the speculation and hysteria and all that other stuff, what's really going to move the needle in all of the blockchain industry is finding apps that have product market fit. So that, I think, if there's any like burning thing, it's like that race against like, a product thinking, constantly iterating and finding that those use cases.
Beautiful. So there's a question also, Farah from YouTube is asking, how did Solana's TVL perform against last year's bear market? Are there any great DeFi solutions being in the build right now?
So TVL is definitely lower than last year. I think at one time it got pretty high, like 12 billion. Of that, 4 billion of it was like double counted in a way. There's a lot of double counting that goes on with like TVL, and it's part of the reason why we're trying to rethink that metric. Something that is good now though is that our volumes per TVL is very high, so like it's very liquid relative to the amount of capital that's in it. So there's a lot of like consumer confidence and like market making confidence that we're trying to think about a lot. But there are some really, really interesting protocols coming out. One is from Phoenix Labs. It's called Ellipsis. It's basically so Solana, because it's so fast, it can actually have a central limit order book, a CLOB. It can have it all on chain. So if you're submitting, you actually submit a buy, and somebody else does a spread. So there's actually a buy sell spread on chain, as opposed to the swap base where there's liquidity pools that stay at a certain ratio. This one is actually a buy sell order book, so you can have order book depth, and you can do other creative things. This is very unique to Solana. There already is one called Open Book, but this will have some like architecture changes that are like very neat, and it'll increase performance by a lot. And yeah, so there's some things that you can do in DeFi on Solana that you fundamentally can't do in other ecosystems. Another one to point out is because of these very fast block times, it's harder to do negative MEV. So it's hard to do things like sandwich attacks. It's hard to see and there's not a mempool. So like in the Ethereum ecosystem, a lot of people with a lot of capital can see a transaction sitting in the mempool, then front run it just by paying higher gas fees, and then know that they're going to front run it and then do some sort of sandwich. That's what a sandwich attack is. You do some sort of like nefarious thing before to get that other transaction to trigger it at some different price, and then you can exploit that in some way and create profit off of it. It's much, much harder to do that on Solana. And so right now, more and more capital is going to the Ethereum ecosystem, because if you have more capital, you can play these games, and you can't. And so, but over time, those efficiencies tend to weed themselves out of markets. So Solana being a more efficient market, we kind of just are trying to facilitate the movement over here, and part of that's just getting more and more, again, product market fit with different applications. So there's more, just retail money, and there's more incentive for more capital to move on to Solana.
Yeah, that's definitely beautiful. I mean, I think with this, we're probably gonna summarize. We try to make it like short and sweet in our podcast. So maybe any closing words, like where would people can go and explore more about the Solana ecosystem, and they can just read the news, subscribe to newsletters or something like that.
Yeah, I think the most accurate, if you're really interested in reading blogs and stuff, is just solana.com/news. That's where we try to be very accurate on those, and really have sources and give links of verifiable information on there. And so you can kind of get away from a lot of the hysteria of Twitter and different voices. So, because that's something I'd always recommend, is people just have very different like people, different news sources when you're yeah, there's just a lot of noise in crypto basically. So having like try to get legitimate sources for a lot of your information, I think is really important. Um, but yeah, I think our Twitter tries to do a pretty good job as well. But there's a lot of really interesting community calls that happen as well. It's like Super Team DAO just had their community call this morning, and a bunch of really interesting communities like Super Team, yeah, DAO and Lamport DAO, all these like communities that are around Solana. So I would just dip a toe into each of those and just kind of talk to people would be a great way to get involved.
For sure. Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us, for taking time to answer the questions from the community. And I'm sure if they want to know more, they can reach out. What will be the best place to find you? LinkedIn, Twitter? Where do you reside more?
I'm actually kind of a weird person in crypto. I actually spend a decent amount of time on LinkedIn. But I'm basically at TAMGROS everywhere. It's kind of like my name backwards with one T. Yeah, so TAMGROS. That's why I am on Twitter. So happy to chat
Yeah.
there.
Okay. So yeah, I'm sure people will reach out. Thank you everyone for joining BullCaster today. So we're gonna expect you right in 2 weeks. Listen us like at 2 p.m. UTC, in YouTube Live, LinkedIn Live, Twitter Live, and we're gonna try to bring more amazing personalities as Matt, and hope to do more partnerships and explore Solana ecosystem together. Thank you so much.